Hello and welcome to Unwatchables, the film podcast that goes where other film podcasts fear to tread. I'm Marc Dottavio.
I'm Seth Troyer.
And today we're tackling two films separated by almost exactly 30 years that shocked and horrified audiences in record numbers, while at the same time inspiring some of them to go back to church. Those films are William Friedkin's 1973 satanic horror film, The Exorcist, and Mel Gibson's 2004 biblical drama / snuff film, The Passion of the Christ. May peace be with us.
Yin and yang.
So this, I think, is going to be a fun one.
Yeah.
So maybe get into the spirit of Easter.
I think so. Are we going to? Yeah, it's currently approaching. We'll change our whole schedule, and this will come out on Easter. Who knows? But
yeah, we should make it. This should sound like we just recorded it yesterday.
Mm-hmm. It feels like yesterday.
Yeah, for sure. So, I don't know, a question some people listening might have initially is, why exactly are we pairing these two specific films together? And
hey, Mark,
maybe to
Mark,
answer that,
why are we pairing these two films together?
I'm glad you asked, Seth. Well, let's play a little guessing game here.
Okay.
If you want to humor me. So, try to tell me which of these films I'm talking about. So I'm going to describe a film and you just decide whether I'm talking about The Exorcist or The Passion of the Christ. So which of these two films surprised everybody by becoming a box office hit and a cultural phenomenon, making it one of the most successful R-rated films of all time? Also,
Passion?
Both.
Oh, both. Man. See, I've played this game before, and I always mess that one up.
Yep. That's all right. I have another one for you. So,
damn it. Okay.
All right. So, which of these two films takes deeply seriously Christian, specifically Catholic, beliefs, especially regarding Satan, in a way that would appeal to true believers as well as casual audiences? Seth?
It's The Exorcist.
Wrong, it's both.
Damn it, I did it again.
That's all right.
I hate this game.
One more for you, one more. So,
all right.
Which of these two films, in addition to those things, was considered so graphic and disturbing that there were widespread reports of audience members weeping, fleeing the theater, or just being generally traumatized? Surely you can't get this one wrong.
Fucking Goosebumps, the movie. I'm out of guesses.
Well, if you guessed Cats, you would be right. But also, both of these films, The Exorcist and The Passion of the Christ. And I do think that there are some interesting things that we could talk about with both of them in a way that might relate.
I'm interested in like the greater conversation of Christianity as a phenomena in film in general, and especially these are like probably the biggest hallmarks of like crossover, widely accessible, widely seen films, as far as even though they are very much set in a theistic worldview in a lot of ways. They are very specific to Christianity and its views, but they became worldwide blockbusters. It's kind of wild. And they are kind of operating on two sides of the same coin. Like, one is really hammering home what is going on one side of the spiritual battle in the Bible, and the other is really hammering home like what's going on the quote unquote home team, depending on who you are, or at least who you're supposed to think is the home team, you know. Satanists might disagree, you know.
And either way that you go, you're going to be drenched in some kind of disgusting bodily fluid.
Oh, well, wait, Satanists would be like, yeah, that is the home team, and I hate the home team. I think I understand. I'm basically tight with Satanists. I know them all. I know what's going on.
Oh yeah, I could tell. So so maybe we could give just a little bit of personal background. Don't share any more than you're comfortable with, Seth. But we never really talked about this in person, so I honestly don't know the answer as far as you're concerned. I know personally, I was raised Catholic. I went to a Catholic grade school, Catholic high school. Even though I'm not a believer anymore, I was very much enmeshed in the whole world of it. I was an altar boy, played guitar at mass, uh, got confirmed first communion, all of that stuff. Hung out with the like teen youth group. And I specifically remember the Passion kind of coming through like a whirlwind around that time, and church groups going to see it and homilies about it and stuff like that. So I do feel kind of in the know, I guess, as far as all these, references and the iconography and all that. And I don't know, were you an altar boy, Seth?
No, I didn't have time for such frivolous old world traditions like you did. I was all about mainlining that evangelical sauce. I was non denominational. I was a very strong, very much a believer for till I was about like 17 or so. Um, and there was just like sort of a I don't know. Like, yeah, it's one of those things. I just don't know what exactly happened, but it was just like woke up and it was suddenly not there as much. Kind of just and in a way that it was almost like a relief. Is there not in the same way? Um, and but when this movie came out, I didn't even see it. I think I don't know why I didn't see it necessarily. I think maybe because it was just like I just didn't even maybe it was me wimping out as a Christian. Like I wasn't ready to hang with just how brutal all this was.
Yeah. And again, we're talking about the Passion right now,
Yeah.
but let's go back a little bit in time, I guess, to the 70s where, The Exorcist wasn't really marketed, as an evangelical kind of movie the way that the Passion was. But I really do feel like it was something that tapped into things that people were raised with, the fear of God and Satan, and of not
Oh
going to
man.
church,
Yeah, if we're
and
talking about
all
The
that stuff.
Exorcist, it took me a long time to see The Exorcist. Because I was like very much not going to see horror movies for a big chunk of my life. First, it was, which is just like the trajectory of a lot of my consumption of art has to do with my spiritual trajectory, and like kind of going from I didn't see horror movies because they were evil and I thought they were, corrupt forms of media, especially something like The Exorcist, which is, would be coming from a secular place to talk about religious themes, which, by default, gross, don't want any part of that. And beyond that, after a while, it was like I felt like I was really like I got pretentious once I became like a non-believer. I feel like, and then I was like, I'm not gonna watch horror films. I don't have time for that or something. So really, like, I came around to horror films kind of late in my life, but I adore this one. This was one of the first ones I ever saw because it is like one of those that I could at least see like, well, this one has like historical significance, so I suppose I will watch it. And boy, there I really forgot just how brutal this movie is. Because when you first brought up The Exorcist, and I think I'm not alone in this reaction, even people who are probably turning on this podcast are probably being like, well, Unwatchables, why are we talking about The Exorcist, which like everybody and their mom has seen? I think it's just very easy to forget. Like, there's a scene in this movie where a little girl pushes a crucifix up her vagina and forces her mom into her crotch as it bleeds. That's that's a scene in this movie, which is like hailed as a Hollywood like classic, right? It's like it's kind of
Yeah, it's
wild.
it's one of those super unlikely things because when the movie first came out, nobody expected it to perform the way that it did. It was based on a best-selling novel from 1971 by William Peter Blatty, who also wrote the film. That was also the same year that William Friedkin's The French Connection was a huge breakthrough for him. Like it was a giant hit. It swept the Oscars, won Best Picture, Director, Actor, and his big next movie, he decided on this little horror film based on this kind of best-selling, pot boiler. And lightning struck like twice. Like I was looking at the stats on this, and it was released in very late December of 73. So in 1974, it ended up being the second highest grossing film of the year. It was Warner Brothers' biggest hit of all time. And even not adjusted for inflation until 2017, it was still the top grossing R-rated horror film. It was Stephen King's It, I guess, that displaced it finally.
Yeah, there's a
But
great YouTube documentary I found that came out around the time of the release of the movie. It's like 20 minutes, and it must have featured on some news network, but it is kind of hilarious. It's just them going from theater to theater, interviewing people in lines and showing these huge, crazy lines, and like people coming out of the theater like they can barely hold themselves up, or like it's all this like really funny discourse of like kids who are working the ticket stands being interviewed by news cameras and stuff, talking about how like people run out of the theater and like they've had to clean up vomit and stuff like that, and everybody's like,
and all
it
those
was
great
really like
70s
a
clothes and hair.
oh yeah, 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 and it really was like this sort of roller coaster thing that people were really into. They wanted to go see if they could handle the G forces of this movie, which is it's kind of interesting.
Yeah, I know exactly what video you're talking about because it's so interesting to watch. And you see the lines like stretching around the corners. The shows are sold out. It's freezing weather. And then, in the media at the time, there were all these reports about, audience members are fainting and vomiting. There's this probably anecdotal story. I don't know. Somebody claimed that they had a miscarriage during a screening. I don't know how true that is. There's
Yeah.
claims of that and a heart attack. Like there were actually people like reporters who were complaining that like Watergate coverage was not getting the attention that it needed during that time because everybody was so obsessed with The Exorcist. And
Yeah, it's like
they
a
had
prologue to
ambulances on
Star
call.
Wars or something. It's like a prologue to Star Wars in that it was this huge, crazy phenomena that like was probably proving that theaters could see this kind of crazy Beatles kind of energy going into movies, which of course would eventually reach a super climax with Star Wars and other modern day blockbusters as they came. It's just funny that like kind of what set it off was this really horrific kind of Christian satanic movie.
Yeah, and I mean, yeah, this was even before, like you said, Star Wars or even Jaws. Like this might have started the template for these kind of wide release movies, because I believe that it started out in like a handful of small theaters, and then the demand was so overwhelming that they started to do like a wide release on way more screens at once than they would normally do for a movie like this. And I mean, that kind of leads to where we are today, where movies will big movies will come out all over the country at the same time. So it's absolutely a fascinating piece of film history, and it even went on to become the first horror movie that was nominated for Best Picture at the Oscars. It actually won Best Adapted Screenplay. So this is an Oscar-winning horror movie where a little girl masturbates with a crucifix, and is shouting at people to suck her cock or whatever.
Yeah, it's a
It's
real victory for
it's
everyone
crazy.
involved. It's a real victory.
Absolutely. This is where art has taken us. And we're a little bit opposite as far as horror movies go, because I got into horror movies very young. Um, and The Exorcist always had this reputation about, this is the scariest movie ever. And some people were just, religious, and stuff about the devil really tapped into this childhood fear, this kind of just built in thing that was, always hiding within them.
Mm-hmm.
But even people who weren't coming from that place would be like, "Oh yeah, I love horror movies. Oh, The Exorcist, that's too much. That's the scariest movie ever made."
Mm-hmm.
And I am interested to see how that kind of plays today. After, this is very much a movie of its time, and the phenomenon was very much of its time. Um, I don't know. We
Well,
might have slightly different takes on this
well,
one.
I mean, we could
We'll
get
have to
right
see.
into that. Like, honestly, I
Mhm.
mean, what I really saw this time, because yeah, I've always wondered about that. Is like that's the classic thing about The Exorcist is that atheists can go see it and watch its implications about the spiritual world and still be scared. Like shitless of this stuff. And Christian people can watch it, of course, and be terrified of this is what could happen to me. This is real. It's out there. This could physically happen because of the spiritual warfare going on in the world. I think it's because, I mean, just talking about Christianity is sort of, uh, that's just the first layer. I think there's a lot more to what's going on than just that. As a lot of those things, like any sort of like cultural myth, Christianity has a lot of things that are tied, and Satanism has a lot of things that are tied to our basic like fears. And a lot of what's going on in this movie is just exploiting a lot of our like really base level fears. And like, what Satan in general is all about, like doing the wrong thing. What could be the worst thing? What could be the biggest taboo button to push? And like violating what we as a society like hold very dear. Especially America, like our like and it's manifested in this movie as a young white middle class, like upper middle class girl. Um, like
Who hasn't done anything bad
yeah,
except that she's not religious. The whole family is not religious. And in that way, you could see this movie as opposed to being like blasphemous or exploitative, which, I mean, maybe exploitative, but this is something that I could see people getting into because it takes it very seriously. And the reality of this movie, Catholicism has it right. There is Satan out there. Exorcisms were real and needed, and the only people who can come and save this girl are the priests doing this ancient rite. And it's all based in a real life thing. It's not some imaginary thing that was made up. It takes it all very seriously. In that way, it's is kind of a faithful movie.
it is. But again, beyond that, there is just the base level, like regardless, even if you take the theological aspects of the movie away, there is still just like these horrible things that we're having to witness happening to this little girl who doesn't deserve any of this. And that is like the most unwatchable and difficult part of this movie. And like the part that really gets to anybody who is a normal human being who cares about children. Like it's just, yeah, it's extremely haunting and extremely, a lot of movies don't go there. Like most horror films, they're not going to go for the kid, right? They'll cut the heads off of all the teenagers and the killing everybody in sight. But like torturing and violating a kid for the sake of a horror movie thrill is going to a level that I think again is sort of, I don't know, something underrated about this movie and kind of
It kind of
underestimated about this movie.
it kind of toes the line too, because the girl is the victim, but she is also the villain, in a
Yes.
way that it's kind of a creepy child movie. And that's what's so scary to us, is seeing this all, coming out of her and played by, a real like young teenager, Linda Blair.
Yeah.
But maybe before we go further, I'll just give like a super brief summary. If you're one of the few people who's never seen The Exorcist,
You're a
we basically
fool.
have a we basically have a single mother and her daughter who are living in Georgetown, and the mother is some kind of a well-known actress, and the little girl starts behaving strangely, and all of the medical tests can't uncover what it is, but she's starting to speak in voices and in tongues and becoming violent and thrashing about, and it becomes clear she's possessed by Satan. And on the other side, we have this priest character named Father Karras, who is going through a crisis of faith. He has guilt about his mother, who recently passed away. And at some point, their paths crossed, and he's the one who facilitates this exorcism. And that's the very broad view of it. But are you ever surprised, Seth, when you put this movie in, though, to like remember that there's this long ass prologue in northern Iraq for the first like 10 minutes? Because I
Yeah,
always forget.
yeah, and I every time I watch it, I'm still like kind of puzzled by it. It's like beautifully
Same.
shot, and it definitely has a vibe, but I don't know. Other than the fact that there is the demon at the center of this, who, well, I mean, I will get into that later, but it could be up for debate. Is Pazuzu, and there's a statue of him that is being uncovered in the ruins. I'm not sure where they are, what country they are in, but Max von Sydow, uh, of Ingmar Bergman fame, is there doing priestly. I don't know, just being
He's the
an
priest
adventuring
archaeologist, I
priest,
guess.
I guess. Yeah, he's got to do archaeology, just Catholic business, I
He's
guess.
like the Indiana Jones of Catholic exorcists, I guess.
Yeah, but yeah, he uncovers like a statue of a demon, uh, and then we pretty much just cut to the real situation at hand. But it's a long sequence of him like there's sort of like a creepy vibe where he's going, and I don't really know if it's I don't know. I get like weird vibes from that scene, like they're trying to like say that like I don't know, that like almost like his this foreign land that he's in is somehow like there's demons here in this strange foreign land and they're invading like good safe America or something. I don't know. I get that kind of feeling. I don't know if that's what's actually going
Mm.
on, but I like only because I don't know what this scene is supposed to be doing for me really.
I agree, because it's so long for something that's ultimately kind of irrelevant. Like, I don't really think that it ties in any clear way to what's going on in Georgetown. Um, and just pacing wise, it's a long 10 minutes for then a character we don't even see again until almost the very end. A part of me even thinks that it's mainly just there so that Max von Sydow isn't only in the last like 25 minutes of this movie, so that we've just seen him at some point before, and it doesn't seem random that he is the exorcist, right, of the
Yeah.
title. And yeah, I don't know. I actually feel like there's a decent amount of filler in this movie with other aspects that we can talk about, and this is kind of the start of it.
Yeah, even once it gets
Uh,
going, I feel like there's a lot of like extra details, a lot in there that maybe is just serving as an adaptation of a book that's like, okay, there's a chapter where this happens or this character is in there. There's a lot of like extra characters that feel like they don't need to be really as harped upon as they are. I don't know. That kind of happens with adaptations of books, which this was.
mm,
That's a thing that a lot of people forget is Blatty first wrote this as a best-selling novel um, before adapting it himself.
yeah, which I haven't read. If I would have thought of it in time, I might have tried to check it out. But so I'm not totally sure where the differences go, but you can just imagine, I think, as this movie unfolds, especially in the first like hour or so, all of the stuff that is kind of missing. Because we have a few different threads. It just kind of like goes back and forth between where,
Mm-hmm.
we see, um, gosh, what is the character's name now? I'm totally blanking. The
What's her
mom and
name?
her daughter.
I'm thinking of Ellen. No, Ellen is the actress's
It's
name.
Ellen Burstyn.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but the
This is
mom.
Tony's
Chris
job, so let's wait
McNeil.
for him.
Okay.
Wait, whoops, hold
McNeil?
on, pause. I forgot I have to do this. Chris McNeil is
Yeah,
the
so
character's name.
right. So we have Ellen Burstyn's character, Chris McNeil, and her daughter. And we get a few just brief scenes
Regan.
that I don't know, seem really cursory to me. Like they're just show us enough that they're like, okay, they have this kind of idyllic home life. There's a little scene where there's like a dad who's absent and she's upset that he hasn't called on her birthday, but we never revisit that again. And even once she starts getting, or she comes downstairs finally and tells party guests that they're going to die and pees herself.
Oh man,
After that,
such an awesome scene. How can you just
yeah,
glaze over that scene?
we could talk about that scene. But what threw me
We
is that
will.
afterwards, the mom's like, "Oh, I'm sorry, she's been sick." And she takes her daughter away and she's like, "It's just like the
Mhm.
doctor said, it's just nerves. Just keep taking your pills." And I'm like, "Wait, did I miss something? Because we're just suddenly starting in on this." And there was no indication anything was wrong before then, or that she's seen a doctor or is on pills. There's like this weird pacing.
Well, I feel like for that part, it's kind of her trying to offer a quick explanation for other people. I think there's something I can't really quite remember, and it doesn't really matter, but I feel like there's something where she's like in bed, not feeling great, or there's like I feel weird or something, but it's only just at that level. Yeah, it's not like oh, I she's been sick, she's been in bed or something at that time. It is um for me effective though, especially upon rewatching the movie, uh, having these scenes of sort of not even they don't even feel like they're like leading or filled with a lot of foreshadowing. And I kind of like anytime Regan, I don't like a lot of the extra scenes where they're developing other characters, but as long as like Regan is there and even when they aren't talking about anything creepy and it's just a nice scene, it really you can remember that scene later on when things are really being horrible. Just like this nice normal exchange from the beginning of the movie becomes very like tragic, and it just really helps hammer that home for me. I like that about those scenes. There aren't a ton of them, but yeah.
Yeah, I guess that. Yeah, I definitely see what you're saying. I think that just kind of the sketchiness of it, I think was more just emblematic of kind of a problem I have as a whole, just with the structure of this movie. Because at the same time, we have Father Karras, who it seems like he's should be like kind of a major character. And we get some scenes where he, sees his elderly mom who needs to go into a home or something.
Hmm.
And then she's like suddenly in the hospital. But then later on, there's talk about, oh, she was living by herself and died and wasn't found for a few days. And that was another thing where I was like, wait, did we just like jump way forward in time? It seemed like another little bit that was like missing. And maybe I was just thinking about like, I don't know, how his crisis of faith in general, we don't get a whole lot of that, do we? It's like he has this conversation with another priest where he just comes out and says, I think I lost my faith. But it doesn't seem to really go into it as much as I wanted to. And maybe just the cutting back and forth between that and the home scenes just kind of made me feel like it was biding time a bit for the horror to break out.
Well, again, to rebuttal with that, and again, to defend the subtlety, I felt it kind of works in that that's how real spiritual struggle kind of felt for me. Like again, I think I said earlier that it wasn't this huge like burdensome like long process for me. Sometimes it is just sort of this like, well, that's not really going on anymore. And once it's not real, it's not real. So it's not necessarily this like issue that I'm laboring over. I like that it's not super. It's at least interesting. I think it could be effective to explore it further, but here it is interesting that you would expect that, right? You would expect that it would be like more hammered home. It would be a bigger deal that he's a priest who is having a crisis of faith, but it's kind of not, and it's almost treated as like a normal thing, which it is quite often. And I think they're kind of exploring that aspect by not really exploring it. That there is just like a lot of priests, a lot of people in religion, especially in Catholicism and these like very traditional kind of places, they're not necessarily believers, I guess. So the and again, it makes it so that once the spiritual aspects that become real later in the film, it you can really, I don't know, it makes me really buy the shock on this guy's face when he sees the crazy shit that's going on. It's like, I thought I escaped this or something. I thought it was just over, you know. I thought it was a non-issue.
I do think that the actor does a good kind of low key job because Jason Miller was pretty much unknown at the time. I think that he was like a playwright that Friedkin kind of plucked out and put in this big role. And he
Mm-hmm.
does have a kind of very like laid back 70s naturalistic kind of vibe to him, which I can appreciate.
Oh yeah,
And, you know, I mean, sometimes you need like Satan and a little girl like vomiting on your face to bring your faith back.
it's true. I mean, that would help me.
Yeah, for sure. But I don't know. Maybe the worst example of that is this detective character. He's like this cinephile detective, you know, who shows up to just
Yeah.
have these like detective scenes where he'll talk about something else or some movie or actor as a way a
He's
roundabout
always wanting to
way of
get people to
getting
go
to
to the
his
movies
point.
with him. He's always
Yeah.
trying to get him to go to the movies.
And especially the way he kind of shows up for a little bit to kind of introduce this murder investigation thing. Um, but then mostly kind of disappears for the rest of the movie. Like we get a little glimpse of him later, but I really got
Yeah.
a sense that he was there to just like fill time.
Yeah, he's again one of those characters that you can tell there was like, okay, he's got to be in there because he was a big part of the book, but he's not going to be a big part of the movie, which is this sort of thing that's, I don't know, it kind of messes and it kind of highlights itself as being this thing where it's like, okay, well, you were just being precious because you wrote the book and you didn't want to cut out a
Mm.
character that just would, if he's not working in the movie, just cut him out. It's not like you owe the book, you owe this character in the book anything. But I mean, I could see it as an author that you would or something.
Yeah. Well, and let's get into the unwatchable aspects of this. I mean,
Yeah,
we've
fuck
we've
all this
already alluded to
shit.
some of the worst parts of this. And these were the things I guess that freaked out people. They couldn't believe they were seeing this in a movie. And, you know, you mentioned probably the worst one.
Mm-hmm.
But you know, you do get the head spinning and the vomiting and you know
Spider
the
walking down the
shouting
stairs
things.
is real bad. That's like, which I guess wasn't in the actual theatrical version. That's the thing. I think a lot of, especially if you're streaming, I think the director's cut is floating around quite often, and it's one of those things where you don't know if you watch the director's cut or not. But apparently, that is
Hmm.
like when she is walking downstairs upside down like a crab and vomiting blood. Like that was not in the theatrical version. But
Correct.
that's
Yeah.
also like a horrible scene. Can't think of something I would want walking down my stairs less.
Yeah, for sure. And so I do. I guess here's my question: is there? So we get a lot of you know her. You know, she's yelling out "lick me," and there's lots of like tongue waggling and
Yes.
everything seems to be like there's that scene where she's like hypnotized at the shrink and she just grabs him by the crotch and like
Yes.
takes him down to the ground. Do you think that there's like any left? Does that stuff all play as just completely, you know, shocking and disturbing today, or is there kind of a comical element to it? Because I mean, I have to confess that a lot of stuff in this movie, maybe it's because I've seen it a few times. Uh, I don't. There's is kind of like a silliness to how like shocking it's trying to be, and in sexual ways in particular.
Well, I think that kind of laughter is always going to come up with a lot of the movies that we watch on here that are kind of unwatchable. I think even sometimes during Sallow, I like laugh, like right where there's like I'm of course like objecting and horrified at the idea that this could actually happen to someone, but at the same time, like there is this like this classic absurd laughter of just like, I don't know what to do with this. This is just so outrageous. This is so over the top. And people often find themselves laughing. It also happens in just like your average slasher movie too, where you're just like, somebody's head got lobbed off, and no matter how like realistic it is, quite often it's just like your brain doesn't even know what to do with that information or something. There's a humorous aspect to it. I get swept up by this movie most times though, and maybe it is partially because of uh, my religious background. It really helps me tap into that world, kind of. That's I don't think you ever really escape if you were really there. So yeah, I get it though. I mean, especially her like, nah, pussy, ah. It was funny, like monster voice that this little girl was doing.
Yeah, and I guess they did at least have like a stand-in for some of the worst scenes, like the one with the crucifix that we mentioned. So
Yeah, I
she
was
wasn't doing all that stuff,
pretty
although she was
psyched
doing a
about
lot.
that. Yeah, there's apparently like, and I'm sure there are podcasts that have gone into tons of trivia. This is like an endless. There's again like YouTube search can send you down a rabbit hole with this thing with like documentaries. There's like a horrible like ETV or something documentary about how this was a cursed production and
Right, the
stuff,
curse of the Exorcist.
when really most of it was just William Friedkin being like a horrible monster who should have like never been a director. It sounds like he was just like really abusive to everyone who was involved, including the little girl. And like there was like one example was like throwing her around like on the bed and stuff, and like it fractured her back, or like slapping people in the face without like without any foreknowledge that they would be slapped in the face, just to get a reaction out of them that he would like, for the camera and stuff like that. It's just like literal abuse. So just like kind of bullshit, kind of the shit that I hate about Stanley Kubrick on The Shining, or like any artist who thinks
Mm-hmm.
like they have to hurt people or animals to get it's like some specific artistic thing that would be worth the harm that you've caused another living creature, bullshit. That's neither here nor there though.
No, I did think about Kubrick since, we talked about A Clockwork Orange and, Malcolm McDowell getting his like corneas scratched. But The Shining is definitely the best example of just like tormenting somebody needlessly.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, it seems like Friedkin was exactly like that for this movie. I know Ellen Burstyn had a bad back injury from this too that like plagued her the whole rest of her
Oh.
life.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, Linda Blair got hurt too. There was, and just like, not telling them that they were going to get vomit in the face, to get
Yeah.
like the right reaction.
Lots with Linda
And
Blair that I heard of, just like she was very clearly like uncomfortable as a child saying some of these horrible things, and it's like wild to listen to her talk about it, where it's just like this grown ass man being like, no, you're gonna, no, don't be a little wuss, like you're gonna say this awful line that I'm gonna make you say. It's like, no, do it for the movie. It's just like, who cares about your stupid movie? Like when this,
yeah,
yeah,
especially when you're dealing with a child. I mean,
I know, yeah, it is like this kind of horrible thing that you can't help but think about the whole time. That there's no way this child has any real idea about what they were getting into, or even their parents really, although the parents are definitely like at fault here, um, just by reading the script, right? And I'm sure there were all kinds of things that she was shielded from until like the day of, but that's going on while you watch this, and she's having to do a lot. She's having to spend a lot of time in this horrible makeup and horrible sequences, and saying horrible thing after horrible thing, like multiple takes at a time, and
in a
uh,
refrigerated room.
in a refrigerated room, like. And of course she's doing it because, oh, I'm like any little girl actor, like I'm lucky to get the part, like this was a best-selling novel, it's going to be a big movie, I should just shut my mouth and stuff. So if anything, like that might be the worst part of the movie, most unwatchable aspect of the movie.
Yeah, and especially the last like 25 minutes of this is basically the exorcism. And
Eh,
it's like this long scenes where they go through like multiple rounds of doing their whole routine. And I don't know, I do think it's a little goofy the way they call in like the old gunslinger priest, like
Oh
coming
man.
out to arrive and do his exorcism. And it's particularly funny to me that in the end, I mean, spoiler, both of the priests die during this process.
Mm-hmm.
But what the thing that ends up working is that he finds Father Karras finds the older priest, played by Max von Sydow, dead, and then he just grabs and starts like punching the shit out of the little girl until the demon jumps out of her and into him, and then he jumps out the window.
Which that comes from a biblical story,
Yeah,
uh,
yeah.
which is how I think it was Jesus. I think Jesus
Mhm.
cast out demons and put them into pigs and sent them over a cliff to die. Uh,
Right, but he started by punching them in the face angrily.
Probably.
Yeah.
I don't know. Yeah, all this stuff. I feel like I can, and maybe you've just seen this movie a lot, I guess, but I can laugh now. But like when I'm there, and I don't know this atmosphere. This movie really does take me over. I just buy a lot of it. Like I definitely agree with the gunslinger priest, and it is kind of great. It's like he's doing one last job, one last gig, and this is going to be his last. Um, the end exorcism scene is just so extraordinary and so intense. I just love that it is just the ritual. And I'm always surprised when we're like, oh, we're here. They're just going to do the exorcism, but no, it's like a really long process, and we see like every little bit that they've got to do.
Mhm.
Um, I kind of love that because we are just finally at the end where like after all the other things fail, it's like we are now seeing like, no, we're at this level where we have to do these religious rites and rituals to battle religious devils and villains, which I think I kind of glazed over that, but the most interesting and haunting part, other than like the fact that there's a child doing horrible things throughout this movie, that is the most disturbing part. But what also gets me at, regardless of where I fall on the spiritual playing field, is when you see the experts around the middle of the film just like fall like dominoes, right? Because we moderns and like we're always like, and I want to trust experts. I want to trust science. I want to trust that there's like logical explanations for things. But that's what this movie really preys on, is that fear that like, well, what happens though once you hit these walls? And those are the most like interesting scenes for me now, as more of a non-believer, is like those parts where the doctors don't know what to do, the therapists don't know what to do, the scientists don't know what to do, and they all just pass her around. Um, what did you think of all that portion, that sort of like journey that they go to?
So I've had this debate with people in the past about this movie. So, well, let's dive into this because there is a certain argument. I'm definitely not the first to bring this up, that there's almost an anti-scientific bent to some of those scenes in the middle.
That's the
And
danger.
yeah, and what I mean by that is like I totally understand this is a movie. Like I get it that we can have stories about a supernatural evil that science and man just cannot comprehend, and all of our worldly tools cannot
Mm-hmm.
fix it. But it's most mainly the way that during these scenes, especially this procedure, it's called like a angiography. I really hope I'm saying that right. um which is the thing where they put like the tube in her neck and the blood spurts out,
Mm-hmm.
and the
Oh,
camera
horrible
really,
scene. Oh.
exactly, the camera really lingers on it and puts a
Mm-hmm.
lot of emphasis on how awful this is. With in real life, this is a standard like life-saving test procedure you would get. And I don't know, there's something about the way that it rubs our faces in that like I know a lot of people find that to be one of the most disturbing parts of the movie.
Hmm.
And I don't know, it seems weird to me. I know that it was scientifically accurate and everything at the time, but the choice to dwell on basically like a person's fear of hospitals. And this is a movie where we see, a little girl jabbing herself with the crucifix and she kills people and is spewing these awful things out of her mouth. And yet one of the most like unsettling things people take away from it is just this scene of a standard medical procedure. And that just seems a little out of whack to me on on that underlying like messaging level. I know you can justify it in some ways, but it's like every trip to the hospital where they're just trying to help her is just like a torment that's like almost as bad as the possession itself. And I mean, just personally, that does make me be a little bit like, I don't know why this angle has to be so prominent in this movie.
Yeah, I mean, it's it's definitely someone just preying on various fears that we have and exploiting them for the sake of making us fearful and exploiting them, whether it's making us fearful of our religious hangups or our just bodily hangups. Uh, the fear that I have with going into a lot of this stuff does come from, while I do have very much a understanding, which we all should, that like obviously there are new frontiers out there. There are going to be cases where we just don't know what the answer is. We don't know what to do for this little girl in this situation or what's going on here. And we might not for a long time even. Like we might have there might be things going on right now that we won't understand for another 100 years or something. There's clearly things like that, but the danger of a lot of fringe thought like that, of like, which we're facing more and more, is like the has been weaponized by extremists, especially right-wing extremists who are, especially through this whole COVID thing. There's been so much debate over, I only trust my own two eyes and my senses. I'm not taking some vaccine that the government, and all like the so-called experts. Like you can't, like, expert has now been this controversial term to call someone, almost, it seems. There's a book I really love that I just finished. It's called Unidentified: Mythic Monsters, Alien Encounters, and Our Obsession with the Unexplained by Colin Dickey. And it's a really interesting book. I've always been really interested in cryptozoology and the paranormal and things, but and similar to how my spiritual journey has gone, I used to like really believe in that stuff, and the older you get and the more evidence you gather, the more questions you have and the more you find a lot of it lacking. A lot of what this book in particular does talks a lot about how these sort of fringe mindsets, like where you let one piece of reality fall away. Sometimes a lot of it, like almost all of it, falls away. You like once you start disbelieving one aspect of the general consensus, you can it really breeds extremism in that way, as it draws that comparison with things like the paranormal or UFOs and things like that, where it's like it no longer becomes this belief in far off alien worlds. It gets tied to this idea that the government is lying to me about these alien worlds and things like that. But yeah, that's a great
Yeah, I
book.
mean, I
And
think
again,
it's
yeah, it's a dangerous path that this movie can send you down, I think.
and that actually leads me into another thing that this makes me think about, which is just the historical reality of exorcisms. So this isn't some, made up supernatural idea just for this movie. There's a real historical context for exorcisms, which, basically were, in times where they didn't know what was wrong with somebody and they were, typically mentally ill, or maybe they had epilepsy or something. And these exorcisms could be brutal and last for days, weeks, months, often ending with the person dying, them being tortured basically the entire time, whether out of ignorance or malice. uh, it was, a real thing. And I don't know, is there something just a little queasy about this being a real historical practice that really was like tragic, and this is just kind of having a fun like fan fiction? But what if, it really was real? I mean, is there that much of a difference between like, making a movie where, witch burnings were actually
Mm,
something that,
that was
what if
good.
they really were witches? And let's make a
Yeah.
scary movie where that's actually something they had to be afraid of, and the only way to do it actually was to burn them.
Mm-hmm.
Which is weird too, because I really really like the horror movie The Witch, from a few years back, which does exactly that pretty much, like goes back to Salem, I think, and is a like really effective and intense horror movie. But it kind of feeds into what you were saying about how it can lead you down that path, or feel either exploitative, or just like we're toying with something that really caused a lot of suffering in real life, and here we're just, we're using it for our jollies.
Yeah, I think he's definitely using a lot of that for being exploitive for exploitation's sake. Just pushing buttons to push buttons. But in a greater political sense, I think there is this sort of like he's accidentally making something that's very like much looking at esoteric pasts with rosy colored glasses. Like this was like, yeah, like yeah, exactly. Like you're saying, like that, like the phrase witch hunt is like not something we should say in satirical terms, like fuck the crucible, like we should have, there were witches and we should have been burning them. It turns a lot of things on their heads, like that, like ritual is good and a lot of this old world stuff is the truth. Which of course it's playing with that idea that like in a very, at the end of the day, I don't know that it's I don't know. I don't know. It's hard to tell. Like if Friedkin is like landing, or Platt or Blatty are landing on this sort of like belief in a spirit world, in this, in any sort of great sense. Of course, like in the logic of the film, it seems like that's the case. Although I guess it could be argued that there's something we're just getting the tip of the iceberg, and maybe religion and these rituals are only just like a little part of what we don't understand. But yeah, I wonder if they're landing on some sort of true believer sort of place, or they're at least experimenting with that like hypothetical situation of like, what if you're wrong, atheist? What if everything you thought was wrong, and just for the sake of shaking you up, you know?
Yeah, and I think maybe that's my main takeaway from this movie, is that it doesn't really have a particularly provocative or interesting perspective on it. That it's really is just using those pieces to kind of shock and disturb people, which it does very effectively.
Oh yeah.
But I don't know. I'm not sure that this movie really has anything to say about faith, or guilt, or really anything else. I mean, I never really felt like it gave me something to take away or think about. And maybe as a consequence, that's why it doesn't really get like under my skin or tap into an elemental fear. I mean, there is a fear of the unknown, but they do identify what this is, and what the, and what the cure is. And that all seems strictly just kind of shallow to me. And maybe part of that is because I don't think that this movie really commits to any one particular like character arc. That the stuff with Father Karras is kind of sketchy at best for me, and the mom could have been another person that this was really about, Mrs. McNeil, but she pretty much disappears like for the last 30 minutes of the movie and
Mm-hmm.
doesn't really seem to come back in a big way after that. So I do kind of feel like maybe this is a movie in search of a structure and a purpose, and ultimately just kind of lands on being the roller coaster ride.
Yeah, and I think that was its purpose, really. Even though, I mean, it's built in that once we start hearing about God and the devil, that this is now part of a greater conversation or something. I don't think that's necessarily what's going on, because yeah, it is like it's basically treats it like science fiction. It's just a what if scenario. If like, what if unicorns were real? What if this assumption was suddenly turned on its head, right? Which is what happens, and we obviously, like, I'm very affected by the movie, and I think like it makes sense that a lot of people are affected by a movie. Like, yeah, it's like all of a sudden all the air we breathe was turned into water, like that. Yes, that's another like sci-fi scenario where something's turned on its head that it would fuck us up real bad and be a terrifying thought experiment. But beyond that, yeah, I think what would be even more effective and stand the test of time a little bit better would have been, and I don't know, I'm not going to be the guy who's like critiquing The Exorcist. It does
Oh, go for it. Go
it does
for
a
it.
wonderful fucking job. I think it's amazing ride, even if it is just a ride, whatever. Movies are about experience for me, as way more than like sometimes way more than their subtext and things. But I don't know. I think some ambiguity would have been nice, which I think they play with for a second. It like teeters, and there's like always a moment around the midpoint of this movie where it feels like the demon is being cagey or elusive, or even like acting like it's a demon when maybe it's something else. Like maybe it's playing into our, like leading us in by saying it's this demon. Humans are afraid of this demon, but really it's something unknowable, something more like fucking HP Lovecraft or something that is just beyond our understanding. That like, but it pretty much does land on an explainable phenomena that humans know about, right? That is tied to religion, which, yeah, again, I get that gripe. I get it quite a bit, and I would have liked to see more ambiguity in the movie.
Yeah, and I don't know if you've seen any of the sequels, but William Peter
Yeah.
Blatty did the third one, which I actually think works better as a horror movie. Just
Mm.
because this one I find to just be so like sloppily paced and so just like enamored with the whole shock tactics of it all,
Ooh,
where
Mark,
I
you're
could have a little
wild,
more fun
man.
with
You're
Exorcist
wild,
3.
man.
I
Yeah.
know. Yeah, we're
Well,
split a little bit on this movie, but
I mean, I would agree that,
I will. But I
yeah, I would agree that Exorcist 3 is a better movie for sure.
Okay, cool. We got that.
Yes.
2
Maybe
thumbs
not a
up.
better horror movie, though.
Oh, okay. Well,
But,
it's a little fun. It's got, it does have good like jump scares and stuff in it, and it is interesting that William Peter Blatty made it too, and he, to a large extent was responsible for this one too.
which I think
But
three does kind of have a little more ambiguity in it. It seems a lot more mysterious,
mhm.
uh, and maybe debatably more evil. I mean, I think Jeffrey Dahmer liked that one more. I heard he really liked Exorcist 3 a lot.
Wow, what a random piece of trivia! I'm so glad
I
you know that.
know. He got,
Yeah.
this is the last I'll say on it. He got like yellow contact lenses because of the demon in that movie had yellow eyes. Wait, no, oh man, cut all that out. I did it wrong. I
Are
did it
you pulling
wrong.
my leg or what? This is fascinating.
No,
Okay.
it's okay. Well, it was because his two favorite movies were Return of the Jedi and Exorcist 3. Interesting that they're closers in a trilogy. but that's neither here nor there. He got the contact lenses because he wanted to look like Emperor Palpatine, but also there's like these creepy yellow eyes in Exorcist 3 that he like really liked, that were in the demon's eyes. And those were the movies that he would watch apparently with his victims and things like that.
Oh.
There you
Well,
go.
I mean, no one ever faulted his taste. Maybe that
That's
was a bad choice of word.
Jeffrey Dahmer trivia that you didn't need with
Yeah.
Seth Troyer.
But there is some you do need, and we'll find it one day.
Anyways, how do we
Yeah,
get back? How do we get back?
You know, what I will say about The Exorcist is the Catholic Church's own like PR team could not have put out a better like recruitment tool. That's just in the sense of like the priests saved the day here. They got to go to them, and all of the like, you know, the ancient ritual of it all is like,
Sure.
it's sexy. He's the exorcist. He shows up outside the house with the score playing and the fog rising up, and he knows all of these ancient things. It reminded me of this commercial that they used to show back when I was in high school. They would like show these like TV programs in the morning, and there was this commercial that was like this packed highway, and there was this 12-car pileup, and people are scattered across the ground, and like helicopters are trying to get to it with ambulances and stuff, and this priest just like gets out of his car and like walks in slow motion down to the wreck, and this victim is laying there, and everyone kind of just parts while the priest like kneels down in slow motion, and the choir's playing, and it's very intense, and he like gives them their last rites, while all of the, you know, people are gathered around and the planes are flying by. And it was like an army recruitment ad. Like, it is so sexy to be a priest.
Then
And
again, the
I
whole
thought of that while I was watching this.
I don't know how Max von Sydow's job and getting vomited on and stuff. That seems like a little difficult. I don't know if I want to do that. Doesn't seem too sexy. But I like what you're saying
I don't
here.
know. One day he's in Iraq. He's in an archaeological dig,
True.
and then he's flying in to do the exorcism.
No, it's true. This is where the real life aspect of the movie comes in, and how we reacted to it. I think that probably was a very real thing that a lot of people wanted to explore religion and stuff. And also, this definitely, I feel like, was a key factor in the satanic panic that happened in the 70s. I can only imagine it started a wave of copycat movies that were very popular, like with religious satanic imagery in it. But I think this is definitely something you could point to as being a part of that very irresponsible time with the church, with churches of all sorts that were peddling this idea that, you know, there are just rampant satanic messages everywhere you look. This is where the backmasking, where if you listen to, you know, Stairway to Heaven backwards, it's the devil talking to you and stuff like that. I think it was a factor in starting a lot of that, which started like literal panic and literal like horrible, dangerous situations for various kids and everyone involved. It was a horrible thing.
That's a good point, Seth. I read that there were actually there was a lot of documentation in the 70s about this movie leading people to think that they were possessed and to seek exorcisms themselves in numbers that were significant enough, you know, that Catholic priests were not super familiar with this kind of thing. And it wasn't a totally like dead practice. Like there were still exorcisms being done in the 20th century, and a lot of the really notable ones that all these books and movies draw inspiration from would have happened like during Friedkin's lifetime. But yeah, the Catholic Church still does them. They revised the guidelines on how you do them in 1999, and
Mm-hmm.
then the Vatican even still offers a class uh, to priests on how to conduct exorcisms. And as of just 2 years ago, they opened those classes up to members of other Christian faiths if they want to come get cross trained on exorcism for
Oh,
priest credits, or however that works in
oh my
in
God.
that universe. So it's still a thing, and was definitely more of a thing after this movie came out.
It's too
When
sexy for them to give up. It's so exciting and scary. And boy, if I don't learn about this, what if the devil gets me? It's like,
Yeah,
I
you got to hang
know,
on to it.
when really like
Maybe yeah. Sorry.
everybody involved just needs therapy. Like the priests and the people who are like going to these priests, like probably just have like actually they have actual mental issues going on that need addressed by actual doctors. But no,
The
uh,
Vatican
dangerous.
requires every diocese in the church to have one like specially trained priest on staff who knows how to do exorcisms, which means that somewhere the Diocese of Youngstown, which covers this area,
Oh man.
there's some guy who knows who or where, how old this guy is, who is their like designated. He's probably got like a little binder with like, he went through the 2-hour training or whatever. But we should see if we can find him and ask him about this movie.
is it
Yeah,
just
that's
2 hours? It's like a CPR class.
oh yeah,
I'm
easy.
assuming I'm assuming that by now that's all it is.
In
You,
case
Oh
you
someone
could
like
do
yeah.
in
it.
the middle of a restaurant starts choking, but it's actually the devil, so like a priest could just run up and save him real quick.
Yeah, it's like you do it over Zoom.
Yeah, there's no way this movie didn't have a hand in that.
For sure. And think of all the exorcism movies that there still are today. It's a whole subgenre. And, at the time, there were movies like The Omen that were capitalizing on the whole satanic thing. And The Exorcist, I think, was the one that lit the fire, for better or for worse.
Yeah, I mean, it's a big problem. The idea that people can attribute, like, oh, like Satan is behind this, not an actual treatable like problem, right? It's such a huge issue.
Mm.
Yeah, I was
So,
curious. So I looked it up. I wondered if Friedkin, not Catholic, he was raised Jewish. So we got a Jewish guy here depicting Catholics. I don't know. Maybe we could find some instance of a Catholic guy depicting Jews to talk about.
Hmm. Yeah,
ooh,
what could
well, there's a
save us from the
segue.
devil? What could really save
Probably
us
too
from the
soon.
devil?
Too soon there. I think we still got to do the.
Well, yeah, Seth, obviously you appreciate The Exorcist more than I do, but is it so frightening or disturbing that you would want to unwatch it?
No, again, I agree with the whole roller coaster aspect of it. Why people lined up in droves to see if they could handle it. I, I will watch it again for sure, and I look forward to it. I think it is exciting to examine these religious ideas and phobias and like spiritual hangups that we all have. It's good to like kind of check in with those again, and ideally not get totally enraptured that we start falling into like what could be the fear mongering behind this movie.
Sure, yeah, and I wouldn't unwatch it either. But I'm more fascinated by it as like a cultural artifact, I guess,
Hmm.
um, than its actual effectiveness as a horror movie. But it definitely gives plenty of food for thought, and
Yummy.
I think so you'd think that the movie that comes out, 30 years later, that's explicitly about Jesus would somehow be more palatable to watch. And yet for me, I think that The Passion
Less.
of the Christ is not only more violent than The Exorcist, it's one of the most violent movies I've ever seen.
Yeah, it's
And
interesting also
the
that
popularity of this one perplexes me even more,
oh my god, yeah,
or
and
fascinates me, I should say.
you feel like you probably could have talked to plenty of religious dads when The Exorcist came out, and they would never anticipate. They would say that like this is the most popular movie right now is about Satan. Like the world is just going to hell. Like movies, Hollywood just going to hell. Like he would have never predicted that 30 years later there would be a enormously popular pro-Christian, Jesus-centric movie like The Passion of the Christ. I feel like Dad's never quite right,
Yeah.
you know.
Never. And yeah, speaking of cultural artifacts, I just
Mel
can't believe
Gibson.
how. Oh, sure. But this movie, we'll talk about Mel Gibson for sure. But so this is a movie that is has no stars. You know, there's some names that movie people might recognize now, like Jim Caviezel, however you say his name,
I don't know.
and Monica Bellucci. But these are not names that a casual moviegoer knows. They're not box office draws. The entire film is in either Aramaic. Is that how you? Yeah, is that how you say it?
Yes, I think
Aramaic,
so.
Aramaic.
Latin, and Hebrew. The entire film, and out of the 2-hour runtime, I'd say a solid 90 minutes is the brutal, gory torture of Christ. And
Yes.
with all that said, this was the 5th highest grossing film of 2004. It's still the highest grossing Christian film of all time. In fact, until 2017, it was the highest grossing non-English language film of all time.
Oh
And it's
wow.
still the highest grossing R-rated film of all time in the US and Canada. So there's some,
Damn.
caveats there as far as exactly how successful it was, but this just like ignited something. And yeah, the disjunction between how this movie actually plays and how popular it was is even crazier to me than The Exorcist.
I had never seen The Passion of the Christ until now. Again, that like, I was not prepared to see it at the time. I was very squeamish when I was a believer. Um, but I now watching it, I can't believe that Nancy behind me in the church pews went and saw this movie and said it was like, oh, what a beautiful movie. And I get that it's like obviously like very moving for a believer to watch something like this, but also like holy shit, it's Christian snuff. It's so hardcore. It's like Hostel or something. Like it's real torture for an extended period of time, like bloody torture that is just emphasized constantly.
Yeah, it's so unrelenting. Unlike in, a movie like Hostel or even some extreme horror movie, usually there's some kind of a break or some dynamics or some other characters or a villain that's being fought against. But this is really just literally a passion play where the entire point is just kind of giving you this VR experience of, okay, if somebody was tortured and killed for this long, this is roughly how exhausting and numbing it would become to actually sit through all of it.
Yeah, about 90% of the movie has almost all the shots have a guy who basically has half of his skin ripped off in them. Like it is hard to watch the majority of scenes in this movie just from the fact that yes, the main character is standing there or on the ground and he's just covered in blood, just coated in blood.
This is one of the most like blood-soaked movies I could even think of, honestly.
Yeah, I had
And
no idea actually.
which kind of makes sense because I mean, I've seen a few of Mel Gibson's films as a director, and of the ones that I've seen, there's Apocalypto, which I actually quite like, which is I believe Aztecs,
Yeah, I
or
want
is
to
it
see that
Mayans?
one.
I'm going to pause for our producer here to fact check me on this real quick, which I should have done earlier
Here,
myself.
boy. Here, boy.
Apocalypto
Come
is
out of the
don't
darkness. Tony's literally in like a cave right now.
uh why is this so okay. Yeah, it's the Mayans.
The
Okay.
Mayans, okay. Yeah, and that's another movie that has nobody that I don't even know if there's any professional actors in it at all. The entire
Hmm.
thing is in Mayan language, and it is absolutely just blood drenched, gory. Uh, but it's like an action movie and it's a blast.
Yeah.
Uh, on the other hand, there's like Hacksaw Ridge, which I had to watch with like one of my parents at some point, which is not a good movie. Where Andrew Garfield goes to, I think, Vietnam or something as like a medic and becomes a pacifist, or he is a pacifist, but he
Oh.
goes anyway. And it is almost comically gory. It
Mm-hmm.
just absolutely revels in the blood and the guts. And so clearly this is something that is Mel Gibson's like specialty. His
Mel's
movies.
there for it.
Yeah. And I mean, actually haven't seen Braveheart, but I'm just going to guess that there's probably some rough violence in that.
Well, I hadn't seen Braveheart either, but I think what everybody knows about it is it's like about this central hero who is martyred in the end, where he is like, and horribly so, like he is pulled apart by horses. I don't think that's much of a spoiler. I think everybody knows that. But yeah,
Which it's
that
hard.
seems to carry over into this too, and that's even interesting that it's like Mel Gibson like playing that character, and now we have him directing Jesus going through something of a martyrdom, right?
And I feel like you can read a lot into his personality and what we know about him in real life. Mel
This girl's
Gibson
got
is
hang-ups.
he's a martyr. He's persecuted. He
Red flags.
yes, and just all of these kind of fantasies of power through violence, and he brings it to this Jesus story, which I think it's totally clear where his interest lies in this, because when this movie starts, to me it feels like the last episode of a mini series, and I missed the whole first part. And if you don't know the Jesus story and you don't bring your own kind of investment to it, like if you were some person who had lived and was raised in the like by wolves and had never heard of Jesus and watched this movie, its whole existence would be just puzzling as to why it's framed like this, why we only get just these tiny glimpses of Jesus's teachings or what his sacrifice might have meant or any of that kind of stuff. It really just wants you to feel this guy's pain, and if you're not interested in that, I don't see what you could possibly get out of this movie.
Well, that is the big exercise that you can go through during this movie that I think is interesting as someone who's coming at it from a non-religious angle, right? Is kind of picturing it like you are, yeah, like what would this be? What is maybe going on here on a more like universal level that is outside of the Christian like Jesus myth? Which I did have, it's a weird exercise to do, but I did have a fun time doing it while I was watching this, which is, I kind of thought about it because, did you hear he was going to release this without subtitles at a
I
certain
did.
point? Which
Yeah,
is just mind blowing,
nuts.
which also speaks to this sort of like over the topness of the movie too, that there's like the melodramatic acting, and like so much of it is so physical. I mean, which I think that's interesting, and that would have been like a fucking trip to witness. I think there is something you can follow through this. That it is like, that's why the story of Jesus is so elevated. One of the reasons why it's elevated, other than just like culture wars and things like that, there is a universal feeling of Jesus being this person who is standing for what they believe in, and they are going to do it no matter what, and no matter what the consequences are. And that's what you can witness through this. And we can all sort of like bring our stuff to that, and that's why it's easy to be swept up into that myth, and be, even just the idea of like, maybe we don't even know who this guy is. Maybe we don't even know we don't know about the disciples. Maybe you know about Jesus, but you don't know about the disciples. These are his friends, like at the beginning, and throughout the movie we see them like one by one like turning their backs on him. Like again, like it still is something that can hit an audience member regardless of what they have for the most part. There's still like obviously a lot of like questions, and it requires a lot of like you doing some mental gymnastics to try and like watch this, and any sort of like if you are at any sort of deficit for the Christian story, right?
Yeah, and especially with like, so I'll say this much for Mel Gibson. I'll get the good stuff out of the way at the very beginning, that I think he is like a very capable filmmaker, and again, he has made at least one movie that I like. Um,
The
and
Beaver.
especially the way that he was just in that. Jodie Foster directed it, but this starts like a horror movie, and there is some creepy things in this.
Mm-hmm.
um like where we start in the garden, and there is this kind of pale devil or demon that is tempting him throughout, and
Oh, it's so
there
awesome. It's like an
yeah,
androgynous, like which of course, in now being where we are and like what the right wing Christianity values, it's like of course Satan would be an androgynous like person in black, right?
yeah, and stuff like that. And there's actually a couple moments that I did find genuinely creepy in here, mainly involving well, there's a point where Judas is being tormented by these little kids, and it's this little
Oh
kid's
man,
face turns into this little like old man kind of demon face.
incredible
And
scene.
yeah, and we have another moment where this androgynous devil character is carrying around this like demon baby, and it has a hairy back, and it made me almost wish that Mel Gibson had directed a movie more like The Exorcist, that he could have made that like way creepier and
It's
insidious.
oh man, it's metal as fuck. This movie is metal as fuck. I gotta say that. And yeah, I mean, I like
Yeah,
that
for sure.
you're highlighting the horror elements because yeah, it is like divorcing it from the Christian aspect. It's genre bending. It's very much a genre bending movie where it's like it feels like epic fantasy. Like some of it feels like Peter Jackson's The Lord of the Rings like has like these epic moments, and then it feels like a fucking torture porn movie, a horror movie, supernatural movie.
Yeah, for the most popular Christian film of all time, is and for a genre that nowadays usually is going to be a movie that's about like an atheist college professor who tries to teach his kids that his
Yeah.
God is dead, and there's protests, and uh,
At least
to
Mel's going to
even
the
think of this
source.
as a Christian movie is
Hmm.
is really wild. So if there's anything I admire about this, is how go for broke it is, how like almost preposterously just narrow-minded it is in its goal of taking you through this experience and not letting up for even a moment.
Hmm.
And but I do see, the Mel Gibson of Braveheart or Hacksaw Ridge or things like that, when they are in that long sequence in the garden at the beginning, where, there's lots of, guys in like Roman uniforms, and almost the whole scene is like in slow motion, where they're first taking Jesus, and this guy gets his ear cut off, and
Yeah,
Jesus, man, picks up that ear and puts it right back on his head.
it's
And
awesome,
it's super just like portentous, and it is over the top and silly,
and it's
but
how it
it
happened.
grabs you. Yeah, and that's how it happened. But right there from the beginning, it's like it gives us a nice gory ear getting cut off, and and then put back on.
Yeah.
Maybe there's something to be said for like the general Catholic fixation on like blood. This is my blood, drink of it, Jesus shed his blood for us. The actual little crucifix with the little guy hanging from it. The
Oh
whole point
yeah.
of the passion plays in general was to really make you feel like, look what he did for you. You have to understand how awful this was, and that's like the one goal this movie has, and you definitely can't say that it ever compromises in that sense.
Yeah, even like shortly after that scene, like it jumps into it so fast. He's getting the shit beat out of him in the garden. And
Mm-hmm.
there's this like really disturbing, like, again, it feels like a horror movie kind of scene where they have him tied with ropes and they throw him off a bridge, and it like the ropes like snap and like stop him just before he hits the ground, but obviously like probably like broke a bone or like fractured his back or something. Like it's like a
Yeah,
really
like they're
gross
hanging
scene.
his whole body.
Yeah, just like another thing to do to him. And yeah, the first night is not even over. They're like not even to the trial yet, and they're already like doing these horrible things.
Yeah, I mean, maybe we took for granted a little bit, like how familiar people are with the Jesus story, but I mean, that's all this movie is it starts is, with him in the garden being tempted and betrayed by Judas. I mean, we're already past the Last Supper and all this stuff. It's basically the last 12 hours of his life. So
Mm-hmm.
we get his trial in front of the like Jewish high council, and they take him to the Romans. He gets betrayed by Judas, but he also is denied 3 times. You kind of get, kind of hit some of the greatest hits there of different things from the
Mm-hmm.
Bible.
Judas hangs
Uh,
himself out of guilt.
sure does. Yeah. And that's the whole scope of the movie is just this small period of what's happening. And I don't know, for a little bit we do get, Jesus is still getting beat up, but there's still him being taken before different tribunals, and he gets to respond to them and everything. But I'd say as soon as they take him to this incredibly horrible scourging scene, like from
Oh,
that point on in the movie, I mean, he's the like blood drenched, can barely stand up and squeak out a few things that he says to people. Like that's the whole rest of the movie from that point on.
the scourging scene I could not believe. That was like,
Isn't it unbelievable?
which there is just, and there's no historical biblical reference for that, right? Where they're like, because there's two other guys that are crucified with Jesus on the mountain, like in the Bible and in this movie. And in this movie, those two guys look like they got whipped like twice or something. And they like, even during the like cross carrying scene, they get to carry like a part of their cross. Has to carry the entire cross. And I guess they're like going at it from like, they were particularly mad at him for being just like so blasphemous or something, but there's no there's no reason for us to jump to this level of conclusion that Jesus was like destroyed, like this scourging sequence where they take out every little like torture gadget they can find in Rome and inflict it upon him is just so over the top.
Now, I think that the scourging is actually a biblical thing. And again, Tony is our Jesuit expert here.
Well, I figured they
Right,
did. I figured
resident.
they did this to him, but I'm saying like I don't know that his suffering was all that like all that much worse than the other people who were being crucified. Right? That's what I'm like kind of confused by,
Mhm.
like, and kind of like find suspect about the movie.
So the implements that were used in the movie, what we see depicted, so a couple of different like whips and flogs and things, and one of them has like the little hooked ends. They even have this nasty little moment where the guard like whips it at the wooden desk and it like catches the wood, and you know, just to kind of get the idea across. All that I think is legit. Um,
What
so
beggars belief, I think, is that he could possibly even survive what happens in this incredibly long scene. It's
Well,
so
no, yeah,
long.
well, no, and like
Like there
what
should
I'm
be
saying
no
is like
Jesus left
there's
after he's
I
whipped that many
know.
times.
And I feel like there's no reason for us to think that he got it this bad. That's what I'm saying. Like, especially the way they depict it is like so manipulative in that way that there's like these other two guys who also were criminals and they just like hit them a couple times. But this guy, we just got to rip all his skin off, right? Which just feels very manipulative of the movie. And again, there's no real thing they can point to other than like, yes, the Romans were mean, but they were of course mean to everybody who was a criminal. It just really shows like it's really exploitative of the movie's agenda, I think, to
Yeah.
prioritize Jesus's suffering in this way.
And this is a thing where, to Mark's point about like Mel Gibson's just personal kind of tendencies and fantasies of power, he
Mm-hmm.
said something like he considered it his duty to portray the scriptural events, accurately, but that outside of directly contradicting the scripture, he could kind of do whatever he wanted. And
Mm-hmm.
this is a scene that is like referenced in a couple of the gospels, but is definitely not described in a level of detail where you could reasonably say like, oh yeah, this is how they did him. So he's definitely taking like pretty, you know broad artistic license here to get this guy all bloodied and fucked up. And we can like you can make assumptions based on like other texts from the time about how they would have tortured these people and what implements they would have used, like the ones that all are shown in the movie. But there's no like description nearly this detailed in the Bible that you could claim this guy is leaning on here. This is all
Yes,
just
and that
to
Jesus
whip the audience
specifically,
into a frenzy.
yes, it feeds into this idea that Jesus suffered at the crucifixion more than anyone else would suffer at a crucifixion, which is like the Romans were probably pretty awful to everybody who came through the gate, right? Like,
Well, yeah, but this is his duty and his destiny, and almost like he's making a point with it through this suffering. And I feel like that's kind of the line in the sand for the movie. Is up to that point, Jesus is brutalized pretty badly, but once you get to that scourging scene, I think that is probably when people were going to flee the theater if they were
oh
going to, or be like,
yeah,
oh, is this what this movie is going to be like? Because from that point on, like, you really can't overstate how much the rest of the movie is just about the immolation of Jesus's body.
mm-hmm.
And it goes on forever and ever. And there's no catharsis. It's like when he finally dies, I swear to God, the resurrection at the end of this movie is like 30 seconds before it goes to the credits. Like, he is not interested in anything else.
Uh-huh. No, it's about the
And
pain
that
of
same
Jesus.
extends. Mhm. And, he does give us these little flashbacks throughout, which are always very brief, just little tiny fragments of, we get a little bit of the Sermon on the Mount, and, a little thing of him like building a table and talking to Mary as just kind of like a little respite, but doesn't go into any of his ideas or anything
Mm-hmm.
um that much.
Not really. Yeah. Again, it seems what is important to Mel and what is important to a lot of people with the story, I guess, is that regardless of Jesus's message, his real thing is he was a guy who stood for something and stood for it till the end, right? And that is what this is really communicating to me, at least.
Yeah, which is, it's delivered in a visceral way that's pretty unforgettable, but it's also a pretty simple point to hammer
Yeah.
home this spectacularly.
Like I could see a argument coming from a religious audience saying that this glosses over Jesus as a teacher, as like it doesn't really tell me anything about why this guy is important. It's just immediately from the get-go implies his importance and why he's like so wonderful and perfect and should be followed and should be envied in this or not envied but shown reverence.
Yeah, and in that way, it's like not even like the last episode of a series. It's like the second to last episode where we don't even get like a
Mm-hmm.
little bit of a wrap up or anything at the end except something that feels very perfunctory and brief.
Yeah, I do like the end scene though. I like that it's so brief. It really just does hammer home what a weird movie this is. That it's about, as much as it's about Jesus, who is tied to all these ideas and religious aspects, it's about the specific body of Jesus, the fact that God was a man, was made into a man, or however you want to interpret that, and this man was inflicted with all the pain of the world and stuff like that. But like very specifically, like unspiritual. It's very body. It's very much like a body horror movie or something. And even up till the end there, where it's like kind of grotesque that we see him like standing up in the tomb, which usually he's like fully clothed and like bathed in light or something. But here he's just a guy who stands up, and we see like the grotesque holes in his hands when he walks away, and then that's the end. Like even there it's showing the grotesqueries.
Yeah, I think it just wants to make you feel bad about what Jesus went through, or just feel bad in a, as a viewer. It's
Yeah,
certainly not an
observe.
easy experience.
Just observe it.
But we have danced a little bit around the man of the hour himself, which is Mel Gibson. And it's really hard for me to separate this movie from what we know about him as a person. Besides the kind of cinema that he seems like solely interested in really making, he also is like a diehard Catholic. Some accuse him of being kind of like a fringe, like pre-Vatican II, like kind of very specific kind of Catholic. And
Oh, I didn't know that. I didn't know whether or not he was
mhm,
like totally devout or something. Because I watched this again and sort of like, it's definitely someone who's crushing on Jesus hard, but yeah, it's hard to really pinpoint. It feels very Catholic though, especially the emphasis on Mary. Mary's a big deal in this movie.
yeah, and one of the big controversies about this movie when it came out was the question of whether this was anti-Semitic. And there's a lot of context, I think, to bring to this. And the easiest thing to say is, okay, yeah, Mel Gibson is a guy who gets, pulled over by the cops and goes on a drunken rant about how the Jews have started every war in the world. And
Mm-hmm.
I think his father is like a famous Holocaust denier. And
Whoa, man, you're blowing my
yeah,
mind.
so there's definitely some really troublesome things that he's bringing to a project like this that you can imagine or not. But I think if we kind of take it one step at a time here, this definitely does dehumanize all of the enemies in this, right? So the
Pretty
whether
much.
it's the High Council or the guards, they're animalistic. They are absolutely bloodthirsty and
Mm-hmm.
cackling, and usually they have rotting teeth. Even the fact
Yes.
that it's suddenly they're unsubtitled is such a classic way of just othering them, where we don't even get to hear what they're saying. It's just like they're barking, nonsense.
These are all good points.
And
Yes, I love this.
and uh, and you could argue that, okay, it's not just the Jewish High Council that's out to get him, because the Roman guards are awful too. King Herod is this fey, whatever ridiculous character that guy is, who looks
I
like
love him.
Francis from Pee-wee's Big Adventure.
He really does. He's like, do me a miracle. I want to see a miracle.
Yeah. So there's no shades in here. Like they're all like out to get him. Uh, However, Pontius Pilate, though, out of all these people, is so thoughtful and conflicted, and in this impossible situation, you know, totally let off the hook, which there is precedent for in um, like Christian teaching sometimes, where they kind of view Pontius Pilate in a positive light because he had sympathy for Jesus and he's trying to balance all these political things. I mean, I think he's the most complicated character in the movie by far, just because he has something like that to actually struggle with. So it kind of
Yes.
gives him this free pass, but
Yeah, it seems like
it's his
he's
own
usually viewed
people.
that way in media
Yeah.
as being like sort of like this last bastion of like order in the mob where he's like, wait, what did this guy really do? I don't know. Like, what?
Yeah, and obviously the guards are awful and everything too, but there's this kind of it makes a really big point about how he's betrayed by like his own people. That you have these high priests who are like obviously Jewish, who are just they're very deceptive. They totally revel in Jesus's suffering. He's really beat up in court before he even gets to go before Pontius Pilate. And there's like a real history in Passion plays of like the depiction of Jewish people and Jewish stereotypes in their like inciting violence and all these problematic ideas, to the point where there was this conference of Catholic bishops in like 1988 where they specifically went over like how we can avoid these negative Jewish stereotypes going forward in depictions of the Passion. And that involves like just the stereotypical appearance, making not only having all of these Jewish leaders who try to get him sentenced to death by the Romans, to not have them all being like inhuman and bloodthirsty and everything, as opposed to I think there are passages in the Bible where it seems more like they are doing things by the book and bringing in witnesses, and there's some people who speak up for him and some that don't. So there's like a precedent for even the church itself addressing like, okay, how can we do better on this and be a little more responsible and not feed into this long like history of anti-Semitism. And Mel Gibson clearly has no patience for any of that. Blasts right through it all. Like these people are like monsters in this movie. And even if you look at the, it's like they're the bad Jewish characters, and the good Jewish characters like Mary, Jesus himself, are like really these Aryan looking like movie star types. And everyone else is the kind of, big nosed, cackling, people in this temple. And
Mm-hmm.
it's interesting to me that Mel Gibson was going to go so far into this historical accuracy or whatever that he didn't even want to subtitle this movie, but he still goes for this white Jesus who looks like Bradley Cooper or Hugh Jackman.
Yeah, he does look like Bradley Cooper.
and
Um,
and so it's all stuff you could maybe justify in certain ways, but it's like if you're looking for it, I feel like
hmm.
it's there.
Yeah,
And
I guess I guess I was wondering about that, and it didn't really stick out to me because I guess I didn't like know who was necessarily Jewish and who was not. I knew that Jesus was Jewish, and a good portion of the mob was like from Jewish temples or something.
mhm.
Because yeah, I always
and
wondered about this movie's like reputation as possibly being anti-Semitic.
and one thing that I read about that was kind of interesting too was at the end of this movie when Jesus finally dies, there's like this drop of rain that causes an earthquake.
Oh, it's really cool.
Yeah, which looks cool. And what I didn't know that I read about in like researching this movie is that there was this temple called like the Second Temple that was in Jerusalem, that was there for the Jewish people that the Romans destroyed, and it's this event that's mourned by Jews to this day on one of their like feast days. And some people suggest that like him showing in this movie that temple being cracked in half at the end was kind of like attributing that to them having killed Jesus, like that was their punishment or something, which again is
Well,
not something you might necessarily pick up on unless you start digging around. But
yeah,
this
I
is
mean,
something that I think Gibson knew about.
that's interesting. I mean, whether there's something behind it or not, which, I don't know, I'm not totally sure, the Jews in this movie are the villains. It's like, it's just how it is. And there are certain Jewish characters who are the heroes as well. And if anything, to me, I'm not totally sure. I buy it that he has some malice for Jewish people. I mean, obviously he had that whole rant and everything. I mean, but even if that's not true, if you know, have some way of figuring out if that's true or not in some definable way, if anything, it is just like kind of lazy filmmaking to make the bad people that you're like poo-pooing ugly and the good people like very beautiful. And it's just like very old-fashioned of him to do that. I picked up on that. Whereas like the evil Jewish temple guys are all like huge gross looking dwarves, and then yeah, Jesus and the disciples are all like fair looking fey elf people, kind of almost. They're still like less white than a lot of, you know, a lot of depictions of the disciples and Jesus, but yeah.
Totally, yeah. That's a thing you can just apply to the movie as a whole,
Because there's
regardless of
still
any
like there's still like a level of
particular.
accuracy there that I like, you know, I think is like a little better than most, as far as them being like, they at least look like people like who aren't from New Jersey or something, but like yeah, they still, some of them look a little white still, and I don't really get that.
It's not like The Last Temptation of Christ, where you got like Harvey Keitel. Hey,
I know.
Jesus!
Specifically New Jersey, yeah.
I love
Um,
that.
but I do think that's,
What
I
are we
mean,
gonna do with all these fishes and loaves?
the loaves, turning the coffee tables into crosses.
God.
Gibson, like kind of not like he'd never really addressed these criticisms as far as I could find. I don't know if you guys are aware of anything, but he just kind of said like, hey, it's not about pointing fingers or who did what to who. It's just about, you know, love and salvation, and that's the main message you should take away from this movie. But
Yeah.
he definitely went out of his way to 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 frame this a certain way.
Yeah,
Hmm.
he definitely wasn't interested in being careful about not letting that aspect into it,
Yes.
or he definitely didn't care about what the Conference of Bishops had to say about responsible ways to stage the Passion.
Sure. And I
And
mean,
not to
go ahead.
no, go ahead, Seth.
Oh, well, I mean,
Uh,
just from most whether yeah, I feel like quite often you go to church and you hear the story of Christ being like killed on the cross and everything. The To me it always seems like the myth, the metaphor that's going on, whether you're a believer or not, that is behind the mob, the Jewish mob and everything like that, is the fact that they are supposed to be us, right? They are supposed to be the great masses who aren't ready for this message. And they are, of course, portrayed as ugly and uh, ravenous and bloodthirsty and unbelieving to the last, right? And that's how I always kind of viewed that aspect, and that's what I really saw here being played up quite a bit. Again, maybe it's anti-Semitic on top of it, which is even like more intense. But yeah, that was like an interesting, and it reminded me of that when I would go to church and I would see that like the mob in the Jesus story is very much supposed to be this like example of what we are. We are a horrible people that did this horrible thing, and we need to say sorry every day for this horrible thing we did. But I could totally see where Mel
yeah,
Gibson is also just being a like anti-Semitic asshole and being like, these people did it and they should say sorry or something. It's like, oh Jesus, horrible.
yeah, that probably is heavily dependent on sort of the like Christian, you know, tradition you come from, and we don't have to get too into like the Catholicism weeds here, but like, you know, Seth, you mentioned growing up like in an evangelical church, and Mark and I went to the same Catholic school. But that portrayal is like maybe not uniquely Catholic, but certainly prominent in Catholicism, and at least like historically. And Mark made a reference earlier to Mel Gibson being like a pre-Vatican II Catholic, which is a thing. But it's not always just purely an aesthetic thing either. There is this, big kind of uh, sort of radical subset of traditional Catholics called sedevacants, who basically reject the Pope. Like ever since the Vatican II Council in the 60s, they see whoever's in that seat as like an illegitimate Pope, and the only way to ever legitimize the Pope is for them to recant the Vatican II Council, which introduced all these like ecumenical reforms, like being nicer to the Jews and being sorry to the Jews for all the nasty things we said and did to them over hundreds and hundreds of years. So it's kind of even if you hear Mel Gibson talk about sort of his flavor of Catholicism in interviews or whatever, it's not purely just like a, hey, I just like how the mass sounds in Latin. It's just a nicer, more flowery language. It makes me feel good. It's definitely not just that. And his like father, I was reading, was really, really active in this community, and there's all this kind of conspiratorial thinking about the Jews
Ugh, what a
undermining
fucker.
the Catholic Church. But yeah, it's there's a lot of pretty nasty stuff there that I think is not very even. I don't know that he even really tries to hide some of the stuff in this movie. It's pretty nasty
Yeah,
in those ways, and in also all the other ways you already said. But
sure. Oh yeah, and I'm not denying that. Yeah, holy shit.
Yeah, and this is the highest grossing Christian film of all time.
Oh yeah,
I just don't know how else to say that.
and it's
I
about
really wanted to.
martyrdom. Of course it is, right?
Yeah, and
I really
clearly
wanted
he's
to make a
just an
joke.
angry guy, like just full of, rage and all of these poisonous things in him. Uh, from his other outbursts that are out there. And yeah, I see him. He's kind of acting out this fantasy through a lot of these
Mm-hmm.
movies.
Yeah, get on YouTube and search Mel Gibson rant. Just
Oh, the rant is wild.
you busy all day.
Oh man,
Any of them?
at least
Pick your
once or
favorite one.
twice a year we whip those out like at a party. They're unbelievable.
Yeah.
Horrifying.
Unbelievable. I hope, Tony, you edit this in at some point on this podcast where we could hear him going, why don't you get into, why don't you do your duty and blow me? It's hysterical. There's never
Oh
been an
god.
angrier person at any point on
Oh,
the
I
planet
forgot
Earth
about
than he is
that.
on those tapes.
Blow me. Oh my
Yeah, we'll fade
god.
those out over the Unwatchables theme at the end of this. Don't
Oh,
worry.
that'd be
Play it with the
delightful.
Middle Eastern theme music from this movie behind it.
Yeah.
The But I do think there is something to that. It's so wild that this is like, of course, the most paramount Christian movie that made the most money is the one that focuses the most on Christian martyrdom, which I think, to again make it about politics, that is such a huge narrative. Like even right now in Christianity and with like right wing Christian belief is this constant like fucking war on Christmas, right? Like there's the idea that like Christianity is somehow like being pushed back, and there's constantly some sort of victim narrative about being a Christian and white like these days. um and I think they kind of get off on a little bit of that. That's in the idea of Jesus, going for his beliefs and being torn down, and like I don't know, that's such a huge thing in that world that it seems to be such a sticking point, and it's such a point that gets manipulated a lot.
Well, yeah, I mean, what is the difference between seeing a menorah in a department store holiday decoration and being brutally scourged and crucified for 12 hours. It's pretty much the
Right.
same thing, right?
I know. Taking my
Someone said
Christmas
happy
away.
holidays. Exactly.
Next they'll be
But yeah.
scourging me. You know? I don't know. Jeez.
So yeah, I think this is a really good candidate for me on watching something, because I am fascinated that this movie exists, but
Mm-hmm.
I do think it is of negligible value to anyone who's not using it to like scare their teen youth group into becoming lifelong Catholics. But boy, it's as far as cultural artifacts go, it's one of the wilder ones out there to grapple with.
Yeah, I think it's only going to get weirder with time. Like, just the fact that this movie happened is like already like a weird like time capsule to look back on. And it's, yeah, I feel like it's only going to get weirder to look back on.
Yeah, I don't think we're gonna get any other kind of movie like this or with this kind of success again. This is a one and done at the right place and time.
I don't know. Who
And
knows? Who knows what'll happen?
The Passion 2, Electric Boogaloo.
Well, he was talking about it.
there's
There's talk about a sequel, talking about the
oh yeah, you're right.
resurrection.
That was
Yeah, but how could he make that like unbearably gory?
I don't know. Yeah, what would he
it's gonna
do?
be it's gonna have to be like some sort of revelations, like,
Mm.
which maybe that would be cool actually, given all of the weird like little fever dream flourishes in this that don't quite line up with anything in
Yes,
the actual text. Maybe like he needs to do the Book of Revelations, go all out,
that'd be
go
awesome.
apocalypto style. Might be cool.
Yeah, man, give me Apocalypto 2 and I'm there, man.
Absolutely. I don't know if I would unwatch this one, but
Did you guys
yeah, I don't know. I don't think I'm gonna watch it again, but I don't know. There's a metal aspect to this movie that is kind of cool, and it is like a fucked up fantasy movie, if anything. But yeah, I think it still is just like really. I can't ignore the fact that it's been weaponized in various ways for propaganda. And also, even again, like I can't help but go back to my roots and be like, I feel like if I watched this as a believer, I would just be like, this is just distraction. This is all just fluff, kind of, for just like I don't need to witness like this bloodshed to like access the actual parts of Jesus which are important, which is his lessons, right? Apparently, like what did, otherwise it's just like watching bloodshed for nothing.
Yeah, did you guys see the story about this guy who had previously gotten away with murdering his girlfriend, and then he went and saw Passion of the Christ and was compelled to walk into the police office or the police station and confess?
That is not
Whoa.
true.
Oh
It's
my
real.
god. I
It's
believe it.
and uh that's so baffling because of that exact point that Seth just made. There's nothing in this about like the teachings of Christ or anything about like love or compassion or salvation. It's just it must have just been like the goriness of this must have been so triggering that that's all it was.
I
He couldn't get the
guess.
images out of his head or something,
Hey,
but
Catholic guilt has always been a very powerful piece of the puzzle.
Yeah, and that's really what
And
this is. It's guilt inducing.
that's exactly what it is. And I don't think that's the kind of sustainable bedrock for faith for a lifelong thing. It might work a little bit, but I think after you go to mass a couple Sundays, it kind of starts to drift away again because there's just no substance there.
And that's what happened to Mark.
That's why Tony lives in utter darkness in purgatory right now.
And Mark's headed to hell.
it wasn't so bad when it was light out when we started recording this, but
I feel
yeah,
like I have to
think the
turn my lamp
exorcism
off in solidarity.
Your cave was a little. Oh dear.
There
See,
we go.
man, in hell the
there we go.
walls are white, baby.
Yeah, you're
There's
on
lots
fire.
of cats.
I think The Exorcist did more for Catholicism than this movie.
You think so? Yeah,
I like to think so. I hope so. I hope there are more like practicing exorcist Catholics out there who got
Me
into it after
too.
that movie than like post Passion of the Christ Catholics. That's a bummer to think about.
They're at least out there being pragmatic, getting demons out of people, you know, doing some good.
Mm-hmm. Oh boy. Well, I think we got that one, fellas.
It's in there somewhere, yeah.
It's in there somewhere. I think we got it. Yeah.
Unwatchables is produced by Tony Scarpitti, hosted by me, Marc Dottavio, and Seth Troyer, with artwork by Micah Kraus. You can find Seth and I on Letterboxd under Marc Dottavio and Sloth Troyer. You can also check us out at unwatchablespod.com for links to our Twitter and Instagram, or support us on Patreon for bonus content and to have a say in what we watch. Thanks for listening.